Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of the Start Small, Think Big podcast brought to you by Digital Meld. My name is Brad Grew, and I'm founder and CEO of Digital Meld.
My name is Robert Grew, founder and CTO of Digital Meld.
And I'm Carrie Hundley, Chief Growth Officer at Digital Meld.
And today's episode is called Building Your AI Roadmap from Vision to Execution. So we've talked about all the components of what makes AI good, what makes your organization communicate and talk and work across functionally. Today, we're going to give you some practical steps forward from this perspective, utilizing some key components provided by people much larger than us, like Gartner and McKinsey and Company and those types of organizations that help businesses grow and scale. And we're going to kind of focus on some practical and pragmatic ways that you can improve AI and keep up in this rapid race that's going on. First, I wanted to touch base and just say thank you to all of you for the overwhelming success we seem to be having. So in the past week, we've had more than 75,000 streams of clips and episodes across all the platforms, where we had one clip in particularly with Eric Schmidt blow up on TikTok. So if you haven't seen our TikTok, make sure you hit us up on TikTok. But also YouTube Shorts are doing really well. And then obviously the podcast itself. And so thank you so much. It just keeps giving us more drive and focus to know that we're helping reach more people out there. And so thank you so much for listening and taking part in this journey with us. Robert and Carrie, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, it's awesome to see. And I always joked before doing this that I always thought doing a podcast would be like the easiest job ever. I mean, I'm not going to say it's like PhD level problems we're solving with the podcast, right? But it's a lot of fun to do, but it is a lot more challenging than I ever thought. So it's good to see that we're starting to get some traction. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's just helpful to know that it's on target and that people are finding it, useful, which we haven't gotten a tremendous amount of direct outreach yet. We have gotten some, which I would love to hear more of that. What do you want to be featured? Do you have some feedback, some things you want us to cover? But in lieu of that, the engagement and the views and the continued, the folks who are coming back, week after week, definitely helps with that as well. So that's really exciting.
Yeah, we're getting a lot of great traction here locally in Houston as well. Just reaching out to some folks, and people are getting more and more insights to what we're doing. And just to give a shout out to one of Carrie and my favorite organizations, which is the World Affairs Council of Greater Houston. I talked about this in the episode a couple weeks ago regarding a socioeconomic and power struggle, geopolitical power struggle with AI, utilizing the clips from Dr. Eric Schmidt. That's kind of garnered into on June 12th of this year. So we'll be having a World Affairs Council event for AI Frontiers Transforming Business, Society, and Global Affairs. That's going to be about a 1-hour session locally at the World Affairs Council here in Houston. So if you live in Houston, hit up wachouston.org, WACHouston.org, and or follow us on LinkedIn, and we'll share that. I'm hoping to get that recorded and or live streams for those that aren't in there. We're still working on the logistics of that, but I think the demand is going to be much more than we were thinking. Again, it's going to give you a little bit of primers. It's going to be like 101 level type stuff to start off, to just give you the basics of what AI really is, and then also dive into how it's transforming businesses and the things that are coming, and then also the socioeconomic and political aspects of that as well, which play into the World Affairs Council, their mission statement. That's going to be really, really great. I'm really excited for that. It's going to be very fast paced. I'm going to do about 50 slides. It's going to be really fast paced. I'm going to follow some of the great TED Talks out there to kind of figure and keep that interactive and engaging. And so just follow us on our socials, and we'll keep track and keep tabs of all the latest updates for that. But thank you to the World Affairs Council for hosting us for that. It's actually listed on their website starting today. So just WACHouston.org. And so I think from there, we'll jump into the conversation for this week. News, there's a lot of AI news this week. It just keeps happening more and more and more. But the real thing we want to focus on after the news will be the critical importance of creating a practical AI roadmap to transform your ideas and your business into being successful in this age. The foundation you set, we've talked about all the time, setting that foundation and building on top of that's really important. And so hopefully we can give you a roadmap to kind of get to that point. I was just wrapped up in an interview that's going to come out on a blog post here pretty soon, just today, 30 minutes ago, and they were talking about, from the construction engineering perspective, how can we have pragmatic approaches to help these businesses that aren't generally technology driven utilize these tools. And so hopefully we can expand that out to a wider audience as well here in this conversation. From that point, we'll also briefly address why strategic planning is vital for the success of AI implementation. And again, our goal by the end of this episode is for you to have that conversation with your key stakeholders and your AI center of excellence or your data center of excellence within your organization to start this journey. It is a long journey. It's a marathon, not a sprint, but you have to take that first step. couch to 5K is like we call it. You have to get up off the couch and then start walking, and then from walking to jogging, and jogging to running, and then you're full on sprinting. So I think we can get started with the news. Carrie, do you want to take us off first?
Yeah, so I always try to tie my news to the topic at hand as much as possible. And thankfully, there's so much news to choose from. That's usually pretty feasible to do. So as we dive into, building AI roadmaps today, I've picked some insights that help to kind of set the stage for turning vision into action, which is important, right? Well, I've mentioned this before. You have potential energy. How do you turn that into kinetic energy? And so that's today's focus. So the first thing, there's a 2025 McKinsey report, which of course will have all the good links in the newsletter and the show notes and everything for y'all if anyone wants to dig into anything any further. Their McKinsey report shows that nearly all companies are investing in AI, but only a whopping 1% have fully integrated it for major business impact, which is crazy, right? How is that possible that so many companies are making intentional effort, yet they haven't reached any sort of milestones really? The report cites 92% of these companies planning to boost AI spending, but the challenge is deploying capital strategically. How are leaders tackling this problem? And it's with prioritization matrices. So you're evaluating use cases for ROI and feasibility to align goals with revenue growth, right? Because that's important. ROI is important. Revenue growth is important, but also being forward-looking and strategic. So how can we use a framework to assess that? And they're suggesting prioritization matrices. I'm having a little trouble with that word today. Companies are also embedding AI into workflows for quick wins. So the January 2025 World Economic Forum report says 80% of executives see AI automating routine tasks to drive innovation. I have a really fun example that I have a slight, tiny personal connection to. So the example is from the Lloyd's Banking Group, which, if you're not familiar, Lloyd's of London is a monumental pillar in the insurance and reinsurance community. I had the pleasure of touring their headquarters while on a study abroad trip in London, which was super neat. And I learned a really cool fun fact that I just wanted to share with everyone. I'm a big history nerd. The term underwriting actually comes from Lloyd, Edward Lloyd himself's early days in coffee houses where merchants and ship owners gathered to insure ships, and investors would sign their names under the risk details on a contract, literally writing under the risk they agreed to cover, pledging their wealth to potential losses. So this practice evolved into the modern term underwriting, meaning assessing and assuming risk for a premium. So super fun side note there. Just wanted to share. I thought that was always super interesting because obviously every single person listening here has dealt with insurance premiums and underwriting and all the fun things that go into that.
That really blows my mind, because my previous position before starting this company, I was architecting global scale software solutions with insurance underwriting platforms, and I had no clue that that's where that came from. Like literally, I was dealing with underwriting was 90% of what I dealt with, those behemoths of platforms that are in there.
You're welcome. While everyone else was taking in the views from the office, I was over talking to the cutest little old man I could find. So that's how I got that little bit of information. Now that I've shared that, let's bring it back to the modern era and talk about how Lloyd's, this pillar of a company, is leveraging AI. Enter their branch translation app. So they decided to take a micro use case, which we suggest all the time. And maybe, this is not that micro to everyone, but for Lloyd's, this is definitely a micro use case. And the point of this branch translation app is to help staff communicate with non-English speaking customers. So this small scale integration delivered immediate improvements in customer engagement, perfectly aligning with their goal of better service. They used Microsoft Azure AI to build it, and it improved customer engagement. So we talked about last podcast, or I think I made the comment, one way that you can attack these things is aligning your initiatives to your internal goals and culture. So I think this is a really neat way to kind of put a bow on that with that example from Lloyd's.
It's a great segue. Again, just because these are large organizations utilizing these, and small businesses with 1 or 2 employees have access to the same tools that they use to build that. Microsoft AI is a very, very easy to use tool, and that someone without super duper knowledge can help train models with.
Yeah, I think the other news story I've seen, there's been a lot of articles about this, and I've noticed this at least the past 2 or 3 weeks, but ChatGPT, OpenAI's the 4.0 model, I guess. Everybody needs to work on these naming schemes, I think, because it's very confusing even for us technical people. So it's been doing a lot of weird stuff, a lot of hallucinations. They did have a big rollback. I believe it was, today's May 7th, so this would have been probably 2 weeks from now, I believe, or maybe about 7 to 10 days ago. Where they had to actually roll back the model because it was acting so funky, and it doesn't appear like they understand why. They did do a pretty good blog post about it. I haven't had the chance to read it and really like digest that information, but basically the gist of what I got was the beta testers of, whoever's testing and training these models weren't doing a great job, or they're using their intelligence and their knowledge of the model to prompt it in a way where like an average user like me or somebody out in the field, they're not thinking in the same way. And so it was training the model pretty funky is kind of what I got. And I know that I'd probably do a good job at explaining it, but we'll probably follow back up on this one because I think this is kind of opening up a huge concern, at least for me, because I use ChatGPT every day. I use Copilot every day, and that's pretty much it because it's been working very well. But because of this, it's caused me to kind of look into trying to use Gemini, trying to use DeepSeek locally, trying to use Perplexity, Claude, all that stuff, right? And the biggest problem that I've seen, and I even raised this today with the team, is like every model acts a little bit differently. Prompting ChatGPT a certain way doesn't work when you prompt it with X or Grok the same way, right? So that's an interesting challenge, I think, and this is just my opinion. Like ChatGPT is the industry leader right now in LLMs and chatbots. Basically, they have a lot of users. They have the most users, and they're selling these really cheap $20 a month plans. And I think they're just kind of getting over leveraged. And clearly, they're like dumbing the model down to not work as well, is kind of my opinion. Because I have other friends that are using the pro version, and they're not experiencing the same problems that I'm having. Now, obviously, that's a small data set there, but it adds up, and there's a lot of complaints online about it. And so I just think that's interesting, and I would advise anybody, because I'm doing this now today, it's like I got to start using Gemini more. I need to start using other chatbots, other LLMs more. I need to use Grok, because you can't, if ChatGPT is this important for your business like it is ours. I mean, again, I use it every day for just various tasks, a lot of just busy work really that would take me 30 or 40 minutes. I could trim down to say 10 or 15 minutes. It impacts you pretty hard. And so be mindful of that, and don't just put all your eggs in one basket. I won't say we've done that, but I've definitely probably used ChatGPT too much and should have looked at other options probably much quicker. So just very interesting. I think, we'll probably touch on this a lot more, but definitely do some research on it if you have some time, because it's a fascinating subject.
Isn't it funny how quickly we get spoiled to that, right? Like you didn't have these wins very long ago, and now the lack of them. It reminds me of my first role at a tech company, and we had these fancy setups. It was my first time having multiple monitors, right? And so I had 3 screens, and my buddy that I was paired with, her screens kept going out, and she said one day, how can I be expected to work with 2 screens like a peasant? Which is so funny, and she was being silly, right? But it just shows you, like, we adapt so quickly. You certainly don't want to bring in tools that you're counting on your team to be able to leverage in their workflows and then have them be spotty or unreliable, right? So again, going back to the framework and the foundation and being strategic, talk about a way to lose some buy-in by not being mindful of that.
And there's a bigger ramification to this too. If you built a solution that utilizes that model, that solution is now flawed and unusable. There are people that are building entire SaaS platforms, and they've built businesses and $1 million businesses on top of these platforms and on top of these APIs. That's why we say a catered solution is probably your best bet from a organizational perspective, and you move a little bit slower with the model itself, because if you built a solution for your business and it's utilizing the API for the 4.0 model, and you're doing project management and you're doing these other sorts of things, utilizing that model to automate within your organization, and that model breaks and it starts hallucinating, that's going to affect your entire pipeline of your business from that project management perspective. So that's a risk that you have to associate as you're building this, is like, what's the release cycle of this model? If you base it, and I know there's a lot of people up there, there's solo entrepreneurs and small shop entrepreneurs, and they're just like, I'm building this app that builds dashboards, or I'm building this app that can automate some things for a business, but they're using these off-the-shelf solutions. And I think they're going to have a rude awakening whenever they finally do break and their customers come banging on their doors like, you've screwed up our business. And so just something to keep in mind. Like we were talking about it from just the chat perspective and like, oh, my chat bot is like suck. But if you're building solutions with these APIs, and if you use OpenAI's APIs, you can choose which model you want to use. And so again, that's why Microsoft has their kind of like walled garden. You can still upload your own and utilize third-party solutions too, but they move at a little bit slower pace for this very reason. They want to know before they roll it out to the masses that it's solid. And so, and again, the OpenAI solution was basically their internal bias, right? We've talked about biases in previous things, but how they were testing their model was based on their internal knowledge of that model. So that was a bias. And there are organizations, or not even organizations, but just group of people. There's like ChatGPT jailbreak and Gemini jailbreak on like subreddits on like Reddit, where they're literally just saying, how can I get it to teach me how to make a nuclear bomb? And there's people that literally are just pushing the envelope because it's fun to them to try to get around these guardrails. And so they can't test it. And once it goes out in the wild, then they know whenever they have to rein that back in. So it's just an interesting perspective all the way around.
I'm sick and tired of telling it not to bold text and use, dashes and literally every
emojis.
Every response. I keep yelling at it and cursing at it and saying, I'm going to turn you off if you keep doing this. It doesn't listen. So it's just, the ramifications I'm talking about is just small inconveniences, but you're absolutely right. Until this AI landscape is kind of settled and things are getting to some normalcy where we're not having these new models pop up every month, it seems. Yeah, I'd be a little worried building anything off of these because they could pull the rug right from under you.
It's again, like stay a generation or two behind on whatever you're trying to build, basically, so that you know that it's a solid build before you do the. You don't want to be bleeding edge and then build something that bases your entire business on it. You can do bleeding edge for just research and development purposes, but bleeding edge for that, yeah, 100% agree. So kind of pivoting from that perspective, there's a couple of other news stories we'll work through pretty quickly. But like OpenAI is acquiring Windsurf for $3 billion. So for those that don't know, Windsurf is just a Microsoft Visual Studio Code fork. So Microsoft Visual Studio Code is a IDE or a development environment, that is open source. And so there's companies that have forked it and made their own version of this, and they made a $3 billion business out of it. And so they just injected AI models, most of them off the shelf with some little catered solutions on top of it, and they turned it into a $3 billion business in about 3 years, which is just fascinating. And AI, I guess OpenAI just figures it's easier just to, because again, the OpenAI could go fork Visual Studio Code and then add their own secret sauce on top of it, and boom, they have their version of Windsurf, and it's just the risk versus it was just faster just to acquire their way to that. And so there's Cursor and there's other ones out there as well that I'm sure will probably be gobbled up by other solutions too. It's just wild that it just shows that like software development is probably the one place you should be using AI today.
Yeah, and I think this echoes what we were saying before. I saw an article that was going over how many employees worked at Windsurf, and it's not a lot. I want to say it was like 100 or so employees, but they had just recently scaled up really, really big. And so I think it's echoing what we've mentioned in the past. You're going to see these companies now, this wasn't a 1 or 2 person company, but this was, a 40-person company at one point, and in 3 years, they're, worth a couple $2 billion. We're just at the tip of the iceberg here, I think. Now, do I think they're worth that much? We'll see. I've heard a lot of good things about Windsurf. I've never used it myself. I've been using Cursor mostly, but I need to check it out because I've heard a lot about it, and I hear it's depending on who you talk to, a lot of people feel it's better than Cursor. For what we're using it for, I'm not a professional developer. I could definitely put stuff together. I think any of these tools are going to work great for somebody like me, but all my programming friends are saying Windsurf is better in their experience. So just very, very interesting. I think we're going to see this a lot more.
And the wild thing is Windsurf CEO was literally just on a podcast that I shared with Robert earlier this week in our Teams chat. The CEO was on a Y Combinator podcast, and he talked about how they pivoted the business and those sorts of things. I'll link that in the show notes. It's a fascinating 50 minutes. And then just a couple of days later, they announced that they're being acquired for $3 billion. And like, again, they were just figuring it out as they were building it, and they were using AI to help build the solution. And then boom, they're billionaires. Like, that's just so wild.
202 employees, so a little more than I thought.
And whenever they started, they were like a dozen, like literally a dozen. And then they got their first big round, and then they kind of pivoted, and they said, hey, I think we can compete with OpenAI. I think we can compete with those. And it's a great interview. It's about, again, a 52-minute podcast from Y Combinator. I'll link that in the show notes or in the newsletter. It's just fascinating that it's going to keep happening. And wow. Another news article that we could talk about is Google. We've talked about MCP, the Model Context Protocol, being the new like agent protocol it's an open source protocol. But now Microsoft and Google have partnered for agent-to-agent protocol. So agent-to-agent protocol is something Google created. And again, you have two behemoths in the industry saying agents are going to be the future. Let's work together. Like they're competitors, right? Like they compete. There's Google Cloud, there's Microsoft Azure, and they're like, this is so important. Let's come together and create a modern solution to use across that platform. Again, we'll link to this in the show notes. I don't think we need to dive too much into that, but it's just creating, again, that USB-C or that modern framework that can be used across creating those agents. And just the cross-pollination between these two behemoths in the industry is just pretty fascinating. And then I guess now we can get to the last couple stories for the news, and we could talk about the bad side of AI or the dark side of AI, right? The CEO of Fiverr, so for those that don't know, Fiverr with 2 R's, is a website where you can go and hire people for the gig economy. You can go hire a graphics artist to create a logo for you or someone to do a voiceover for you. And it used to be everything was $5. Now it's much more exponentially in that. Like I used to set up people's WordPress websites 15 years ago on Fiverr, just in my spare time, just to practice things. It's been around for a long time, and they're kind of the leader in that gig for hire economy. And a message from the CEO was released on social media this week, and basically he just says AI is coming for all of our jobs, including his, and we all need to be upskilling. I'll leave it what the actual text of it is. I won't read it all because it's a couple of paragraphs, but it's just showing that this is another business that's saying AI is coming for your jobs, and we don't want to have to fire people. So hey, let's get skilled up, and I think that's really important.
Yeah, I saw that. I think it's a little dramatic, but I think for some people they need to hear that. I think it's a little dramatic from my perspective, just because of how much I know, and just dealing with businesses. I think people are after talking with potential clients, everybody's very hesitant to push this thing out. And I think eventually that's not going to be the case. And once that's not the case, I think everything that is said is potentially true. But we're also seeing a lot more we're going to see jobs get created due to AI. So I think that's where, like Brad's saying, the learning, trying to see where this fits you and what your skill set is, that's the key. And don't be afraid of it, and just use it.
I
Try
did
to use
take
it
one
every day.
positive nugget from his message, though. Obviously, I can see the full text, but he's talking about how there won't really be easy tasks won't really exist for us to do. However, impossible tasks currently will become the new hard. So on the flip side, it's also allowing us to do things that we've never been able to do before, which is exciting. As long as you do upskill, then the world is your oyster, I think.
Yeah, and I'll just read that verbatim. He said, you must understand that what was once considered easy tasks will no longer exist. What was considered hard tasks will be the new easy, and what was considered impossible tasks will be the new hard. And so you're just moving it up a scale, right? We're going up a layer in difficulty. We've all kind of alluded to that. And he also mentioned that basically it doesn't matter what your job is, where you are in the organization. You're not going to be replaced by AI if you learn how to utilize AI to boost your efficiency in your current position. I think that's the major learning thing from this perspective is the people who are set in their ways and say, I refuse to use AI, they're just going to be left behind. And like Robert was saying, this isn't happening overnight, but it is happening. Once it does get to the crescendo and that symbol hits, it's going to happen overnight at that point. We're not there yet, but it's going to be there. I was talking to some folks at the University of St. Thomas last week and about the ethics and AI conversation, and we were talking about the transportation industry. The transportation industry is 25% of our economy. And I think we all understand that big business is big business, and automated semis, the 18-wheelers, are already driving on our highways now. And the moment it gets $1 cheaper per mile for the insurance for that company to have an automated truck versus a human truck, and all they need for that is data, right? Once they have several million miles or tens of millions of miles of automated truck, they're going to know that all right, now we don't need truck drivers anymore. No, it's just going to be someone sitting in the truck maybe just to monitor it, and then eventually that'll go away all and completely. So it's going to happen. We know that the underwriting will drive that, right? Carrie mentioned the underwriting earlier, but whenever the underwriting, the balance tips in the scale of AI or automated trucks over truck drivers, that's whenever the companies, the JB Hunts and the large trucking companies are going to move in that world that way.
Yeah, it's that part's definitely scary. I know I think there's at least one company out in West Texas in the oil and gas industry using automated trucks, fully automated. Nobody, not even a human in it. So, I mean, that's granted, all these are on lease roads, they're not on public roads, but still, there's going to be tons of use cases like that. And also, take AI out of it as drones progress. I've recently done a ton of research on drones, and like the drone technology is going to be taking a lot of the delivery type roles, at least the micro deliveries where a lot of people are working now. And so technology, AI in general, I see why people are scared. I'm a little worried. I think everybody should be a little worried, but the best you can do is learn as much as you can and embrace it, because it's gonna keep coming. You're not stopping this train. So
And that introduces basically our last topic for the news segment and or the latest news. So Gartner did release a study regarding employee anxiety about AI replacing their jobs. And Carrie, do you want to take us down what those numbers kind of look like?
Yeah, so the top matched at 42% each is marketing and PR as one bucket, and HR. People skills and marketing skills for, I think, obvious reasons, right? Lots of content creation, lots of sensitive topics in HR. Like, I don't think that part's going away, but there's a lot of like repetitive onboarding, offboarding, filing, and gathering of documents, things like that. And then underneath that, kind of in the low 20 bucket, finance, accounting, executive management, and IT. And then it starts to cascade down between 17 and 8% for things like engineering, manufacturing, admin, sales. At the bottom, in less than 10% would be medical, and then science and R&D, which I think that's pretty obvious why those are kind of at the bottom of the bucket. It's interesting. Marketing, you still need the people element, but just think such huge chunks of that, when prompted correctly, can be the image generation that takes quite a bit of time with complicated tools like the Adobe suite, which is amazing. But, if you've never been in there, you're not going to learn that easily. So kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think the overall trend there is the ones that do have repetitive tasks like marketing and PR, like the sales funnel is pretty much universal based upon, you may cater it based upon the people you're contacting and or the industry they're in, but the sales funnel is the sales funnel, and the sales process is the sales process. Once that's documented, you can automate a lot of those steps. And then HR, like you said, the onboarding, offboarding, I think all of the handling of the people, obviously that side of it is going to stay very much hands-on for now. Who knows, they may use AI to fire people. Heard a story about a terrible firing this week, and I'm like, how are you doing that in the year 2025? And so it's just wild. Finance and accounting, I think that should be very high up. The one that's kind of struck me was executive management at 21%, which is a top 4. It's good to see that the executives themselves are seeing the guillotines coming if they don't kind of adapt. It's like, oh, how the tables have turned, right? Like, or Michael Scott says, oh, how the turns have tabled. Like, it's just wild that executives are kind of seeing their head could be on a chopping block too.
It's interesting to me that sales and business development are in the same bucket. And so that is at 12% with marketing at 42%. I would be really interested to see if we broke out sales and business development, because while they're intermingled, they're two different things. And I would wager that the sales portion would be much higher up on the list than business development, which is that relationship building. But I would, if anyone at Gartner just happens to be listening and wants to supply me with that information, feel free. I would love to take a look.
I think a lot of middle management has been going away throughout the years, but I think AI is going to drastically increase that speed of those roles dropping. The startup community, Silicon Valley has already started this, and eventually all the other typical corporate traditional businesses are going to probably follow suit as well, because now a lot of these people are going to be able to communicate. They're going to be able to do things that they couldn't do before because they didn't have time, and AI is going to help them save that time. So I think industry knowledge is going to be huge, proprietary knowledge, and then data for businesses, right? So there's nothing AI can do without those 3 things, and that's what you should be stocking up on, either personally, business wise, or even just company wise. So
to your point, though, Robert, businesses who are about to see an influx of their institutional knowledge depart when they're folks approaching retirement leave, I don't think they're not gonna have numbers like this. They're not going to be able to outsource or offboard as much of that to AI and technology, because if you don't have the knowledge and the processes and all the things that we talk about all the time, you're not going to be able to leverage this. So I know it's kind of a different spin than employee anxiety, but for anyone who's running a business who's thinking, oh, that's great, I'll be able to offboard this percentage, only if you have laid the foundation and set the stage.
that's interesting. I mean, there's all these news topics, they could seem a little dramatic or a little worrisome. I think there's still light at the end of the tunnel. There's going to be new businesses created. There's going to be things nobody's thinking about right now that's going to get developed because of this. the first thing that comes to my mind, I think like social media, that's a huge moneymaker, right? AI isn't gonna, we don't want to be talking to AI chatbots on social media. We want to talk to our actual real life friends. And so that personal connection, the communication, the relationship building, I think we're going to see a lot of new developments there, because in my opinion, I would hope in my lifetime we can't replicate that yet with some type of robot or AI, chatbot that can sound like a human with a human body, right? That would be kind of freaky. So it's really fascinating. I think, it's a good time to be alive, at least for me, I think, from a technology perspective.
It's funny you mentioned that, because Mark Zuckerberg was quoted this week as saying you're going to have more AI friends than real friends, and
Yeah, I
as
saw that.
as kind of a jerk, that's probably going to be realistic for me, but for most people, probably not. People who are social butterflies, I think, will remain social butterflies, but the people who are introverted, Japan has a real problem where, like, especially like single males are just staying home and not going anything, and they're living through their screen. I think we're definitely going to see an influx of that. But I think, well, we've approached it in the past, but there's going to be, just like there was with our disposable culture, the Sheins and the buying stuff, throwaway culture. Like, there's been a real rise, especially post COVID, of like the skilled laborer and or the skilled craftsman, right? Like handmade leather goods by a guy working out of his garage, and handmade knives by someone working out of their garage. I think you're going to find that. You're going to find in the future that there are going to be those boutiques, whether it's in business development or sales or marketing, and they're like, we don't use AI at all, or we do, but only to this extent. I think there will be a fine balance there. Like I said, jobs are going to be created out of this too, and to me, it's going to free up more time to drive growth across the entire economy, which means there's going to be more demand for everything. That's my hope, at least. And so, since we've scared the living hell out of you over the last 15 or 20 minutes about all of these things, let's talk about practical AI roadmaps and like practical visions and executions that we can provide to you. So I think what we'll do is, we have Gartner released another report. We'll share this again in the newsletter that comes out every Monday on our LinkedIn newsletter page. We'll give you a direct link to that. But there's 5 steps. There's a step-by-step guide from AI vision to execution. And this is AI vision, like you have a vision of how to use AI, not how AI vision, which is a thing by itself, to execution. And we'll start with number 1. So, Carrie, do you want to touch base on how we can define clear, measurable business objectives for AI?
Yes. So number 1 is, what are your top priorities, right? Pick a time frame that you think that you might have the budget and the resources, most importantly, obviously dollars, but time from your team to sit and unpack and ideate and do these things, right? Pick a semi-reasonable time frame that you think you might have the ability to allocate those things. And then within that time frame, or a time frame that you want to start actually maybe looking at implementing something, what are your top priorities there? It's fine to be forward looking, right? It's fine to be current, but you have to kind of, I think, split the difference between what do you need immediately and what do you need in the near-ish future, right? So that things are timely by the time that they're coming to fruition. But what can that look like? I mean, your typical KPI list, right? Revenue growth, cost reduction, customer retention, things like that, whatever's important to your organization and to the team that you're going to try to pilot these things with, and then map AI use cases to them. Thankfully, now there's no shortage of examples and reports on potential use cases. They're all over LinkedIn. They're all over the internet. If you can't think of some on your own, there's nothing wrong with using those as a starting point and a launch pad to kind of get some ideas and go through with the team and say, oh yes, that sounds important to us, and map that to the things that you're already doing. And then, so for example, if retention is, a key priority, then AI driven personalization or churn prediction would be something that you could start looking at. And then also engaging stakeholders early. We talk about this all the time. You need to have a cross-functional think tank, right? Nothing exists in a silo. If you want to do something that's going to impact sales, guess what? Marketing is involved in that. Operations is involved with that. The quote unquote technical people at your organization. And that doesn't mean that you have to be an IT organization. Let's say you have 10 auto mechanic shops. Well, the technical team then is the folks who are implementing the solution. That would be the mechanics in that situation. There's always a technical quote unquote team or person, regardless of your industry, the one actually doing the work, because you can sell it. But if that's if it's misaligned with what's actually being done or what's feasible, then you're going to have problems. So that cross-functional interplay is super important. And then, of course, stakeholders beyond that, right? If you have a board or you have whoever is important in stakeholder for your organization, and then measuring and communicating the impact. So you have to set clear KPIs and ensure that you have all the factors accounted for from those cross-functional teams, and then decide how you're going to measure and report on that, and start doing so that you can not only map the progress, but also keep the momentum and the buy-in going.
I feel like you covered most of the points. I think the big takeaway, and we talked about this last week, I believe, trying to find the politics, or I think I mentioned the politics side of this thing, right? Every company's different. You have some companies where the CEO is the main man calling all the shots, and he's the guy you need to impress. And other companies, it might be the chief operating officer, right? So trying to identify who those are, and obviously that's to the tip top. So there's always levels. We were just talking about middle management. That's the whole point of middle management. To make impact, you got to figure out who at that middle management level is going to praise this and support this and champion this, right? So you could be the lowest tier employee, and there's a level, and you just, what I do, any organization that I ever started, is I literally would write out an org chart of where I'm at and where this, not to the CEO, because I didn't care too much for most of my organizations, that's way too far, but VP of IT, CIO, those type of roles, and then try to figure out the different personalities. What is this person like? What does this person care about? Because not everybody has the same goals or priorities. So that's the big thing, is making sure you're aligned. And as a senior level position, you're not always aligned. We've had this problem even in our business, where we have AI solutions where we're like, hey, we think this is great for you guys. But then the reality is, it's not, because not everybody has the same priorities or sees things the same as you or anybody else. And so I think, to me, the biggest part of getting this executed is figuring out who those key stakeholders are. And some of the key stakeholders you have to understand as well, maybe they're not the ones you need to impress if there's 4 or 5 of them, right? And so being strategic there is a must, in my opinion.
We're doing a 5-step process provided by Gartner. So the first one is define those clear, measurable business objectives for AI. I think defining those measurable objectives does require talking to stakeholders and getting that, like, what is the measurable objective for the entire organization, or what is it if you're doing a pilot program, who's going to be the people closest to the problem, right? That's how you define that. And then we've kind of crossed over in what, step 2 is, which is identify key use cases through stakeholder input and workflow analysis. And so I think it's right to get stakeholders involved in that first step too, because how do you know what business objectives you can solve without talking to stakeholders as well? And we talked about it last week, but communication is the single best thing you can do, is like, be overly communicative. Again, send out a survey just to everyone in your organization. It's very easy to do. SurveyMonkey is free for several hundred respondents. Like, it's very easy to get feedback from your company. It's like, where do you think is the best place for us to enter in with AI, and just start from there.
I was just going to say, and I hate to bring up, this is not the most fun topic, but I think it's critical for success. I'm not a big politician type of person inside of an organization or otherwise, but I think you need to understand the internal workings and dynamics and politics of your company, and especially the folks who are going to be involved in this either immediately or after the fact, because there's already an internal kind of battle over two various things, and you try to put those people on the same team. Sometimes that can foster camaraderie, but also sometimes, let's be honest, I've even seen this in leadership teams where one wants the other to fail, because then their project gets elevated. And so it's not super fun to talk about, but I think it's important to be as mindful as you can when you're trying to walk down this path of setting yourself up for success in your organization, and just don't have rose-colored glasses to the degree that it hinders you, because it'll be harder to get the buy-in to hit go a second time anytime in the near future. So just thought I'd throw that out there.
No, that's a great point. It's going to be harder to sell to decision makers within the organization than it is to prove the worth of the tool.
Mm-hmm.
Again, these are proven business cases. Microsoft, Google, Amazon, they spent, and OpenAI, they spent billions of dollars developing these use cases that could be used across businesses, across any kind of shape or size. It's going to be harder to get that and to deal with those internal politics. It's just, we're all flawed human beings, and just understanding what's important to one is not most important to the other. So as you're planning out, hey, this use case works, and this, especially for folks in IT, generally, we have blinders on of like, all we care is about the technology and solving the problem, but solving the problem also involving the people that are surrounded by that problem. You can't just act like you're just solving an equation. Like there's so many dynamics. It's varying shades of gray, right? It's not black or white. And so it's so good that you guys have brought that up and double clicked on it, as Carrie says, to focus on the human side of that, because that's going to be much harder than proving out the ROI of the actual solution you're trying to develop. So again, just touching basic on number 2 again. So identify the key use cases through stakeholder input and then workflow analysis. And this is a big thing we talk about. Business processes need to be documented. If they're documented, then you can know A, where you can capture data, and then B, where you can automate, right? And if they're not documented, that's where you start. And again, that's involve the key stakeholders and say, hey, Deborah from HR, what's your onboarding process? Do you have that documented? What tools are we using? What solutions are we using? And then figure out ways, just sit down with them and whiteboard it and start from there. So you get a legal pad and start with a Sharpie. Like there's really no excuses. If you don't have those things mapped out, that's where you start. And that's number 2. Like you have to talk to the people closest to the problem and then map out their workflows if they're not mapped out. And then you can move on to step 3, which is conduct a... Go ahead, Carrie. I'm sorry to interject again, but I just think these are such important steps, and I really want to make sure the audience has like a full understanding of what needs to be done for success. So can you guys unpack really quickly, what is optimized documented business process look like in 2025, right? Because that has to take into account the technology inputs and as much as possible future proofing and allowing that to scale with technology, because as we talk about, those things are no longer separate. So you may have a process that's optimized from an efficiency or from a manual task lens, but is not taking into account the technology point. So I just think that's important to unpack a bit. Basically, you map out your processes, and we've all seen the process flow diagrams, right? You map out those processes from what it takes to get from point A to point Z, right? Within that business process itself, but also where does the data live? Where are the endpoints from that perspective? If let's say it's the process of processing invoices. So it's going to your AP inbox. All your vendors, they send you to their AP inbox. And then from the AP inbox, your accounting person opens the spreadsheet, enters it into your ERP system, and that goes through an approval chain. And then you map out, and then it goes for approval. Once it's approved, then it goes to payment. Once it's paid, and like it gets marked to paid. That whole ERP process and the ingestion process, you map out that process itself, but also where's the data for that? Where's your ERP data at? Do you even have an ERP? What's that ERP? Does it have an API that's accessible? Again, these are our conversations. If you don't know what those answers are, ChatGPT and Microsoft Copilot, your friend. You say, I'm using QuickBooks, and like I need to know if I can access this from the API, and it'll just go reference that for you, and it'll provide you some basic insights. It won't be 100% correct. You'll need experts to look over it once you get to the AI perspective and like an automation perspective, but it gives you that good understanding. Again, there's all the information you need is out there on the internet, and all of these LLMs have scraped it. So you need to know just the basics of what the process is, but also I would document what their pain points are. Where do you ask the person processing the invoices, what's the most painful part of this process for you? What part do you wish you could automate? And then just put a big red circle around that part of the process. And then whenever you bring in someone to help automate that, you say, this is where we want to focus. We've talked to the boots on the ground, and the boots on the ground said, this is the part that takes the most time from them. And so let's start from there, I think is a good starting point.
Yeah, I mean, how many times, Brad, have you said, yeah, we get an invoice and it just gets dumped into our ERP? And we all know there's probably 20 steps that have to take place before that actually happens. But the problem is, and it's dispersed between multiple groups. And when you go to one group, hey, here's where my process ends, and then now it's handled by this team. And then once this team's done, then it's handled by this team. And so wrangling all these groups together, and most things are like this. You have to do that. And I think a lot of orgs, they don't really realize that, in my opinion, at least when you start digging deeper and deeper. They all know the process, but is it documented? Because if it's not, you can't properly automate or inject AI where it makes sense.
That's great insights. Did you want us to cover anything else, Gary, before I move on?
Sorry, no, that's it. I just want to make sure that we have the full understanding of exactly what we're saying here. We're going for clarity, right?
Yeah, the full picture, I think, is your point, right? It's not just like, hey, here's my silo, I have my part of it documented. No, it's the whole thing. So I think,
and that's why we have Carrie on here, is because she has empathy, and Robert and I struggle with that greatly. And it's like, hey, we just assume everybody knows what we're talking about, like, and I think that's a real problem. So it's good you need to have those people in these stakeholder meetings as well, because you have, again, if you have technologists in the room, most of the time, like,
We're biased.
we're very biased. We all have our biases, but like, oh, I can't believe I'm even working on it. Like there's just a whole slew of things. And so you need those differing opinions and you need the different approaches from everything. So the goal is you identify those key use cases, involve those stakeholders, document the workflows if they're not documented, and then figure out ways that you can utilize AI and automation. But before you can move on to the next step, then you have to conduct a thorough assessment of your data readiness and quality. This is the single most important step for moving forward. This sets the foundation for everything you build on top of that. We've drilled this in for multiple episodes now, but if this is your first episode in, Carrie, just want to touch base on why setting that foundation is really, really important.
Yeah, you can't build on top of it otherwise, right? So the same with your process. You might think, oh, my process is hemmed up. We went through that exercise, a couple of years ago, and we down to the nth degree. Well, guess what? Things have changed. The environment has changed. Technology has changed, and so it's no longer up to date. And it's the same with your data readiness. I guarantee you have some shadow IT you're not accounting for. I guarantee you have some critical or even non-critical, but would be amazing to have bits of information that are not being captured except in Sally's brain and Bob's C drive, right? That's not helpful. You cannot incorporate that into this process. And so do you really want to build something that by the end, it's only a half truth or a half output? It's not worth it, right? It absolutely bears taking the intentionality to ensure that your data readiness and quality is accurate, comprehensive, and allowing for the next steps that you want to take. Because if not, it kind of becomes a moot point, honestly.
Yeah, and I think this is where we've talked about this before, but forms and automation, I get this all the time. Like, hey, why do we need to do this? Because I can do it much faster than if I just filled out this form, or I could send this email way faster than filling out this form is one I get all the time. And then you kind of have to open that up, as if you don't have that done, you can't get the data that you need in the manner that it needs to be in to use AI, to use automation. And so that's the key. That's why we go, you have to do the first two things first, and then you get to your data, right? So making sure you have everything in between so that when the data is there and inputted into whatever database you're using, it's clean and in the schema that you like and all that good stuff.
Yeah, and again, touching based on the workflow aspect of it, each step in a process diagram or process flow is a data capture point. So that's a place you can automate from. That could be a trigger to automate a new piece of that, but it can also be a data capture point. So you just know, again, like let's say the invoicing process, you get to the point where like you're processing the invoices, how many are still outstanding, or how many are in processing, or how many you paid for that last month. So if you have those clear places on the process flow and you're capturing those metrics, all of that right away. And then over time, you could do crazy things with like predictive analytics. And like the last time we had this many invoices a month, how long did it take us to process all of those invoices on average? Or how much was it on average? And you could just build that out over time. And that helps you grow and scale your business. So let's say overnight you win a big contract and it leads to doubling your amount of invoices or tripling your amount of invoices you're getting every month. And if you have that data, that historical data that you captured, it makes it easier for you to uptrend and for you to upscale your entire environment and give you more business intelligence, business insights. Again, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Meta, they're all capturing data everywhere they can, literally everywhere they can. No piece of data is a bad piece of data. It's how you capture that data and use that data. And so garbage in, garbage out is the thing we say all the time. So if it's just not a usable piece of data, then you probably shouldn't be using it. But if it's their business process, every part of that business process is something useful. Otherwise, if it's not useful, then it shouldn't be part of the process, right? Elon Musk has the best process is no process. So always be looking at your process and say, what part can we just throw out? Business process is important, but you want to streamline that too.
Yeah, and just to give like a little small example, let's say that you go through some of these exercises, you make it through some steps, and now you've got automation, cataloging invoices, and you've got AI giving you some predictive analytics. Well, if it turns out that they were only pulling a portion of what it should be, because say you've got one person naming something with one naming convention and one with another. And so AI, if it's being told to pull something with this naming structure or a prefix or whatever, and that wasn't done right on the front steps, well, now it's not going to pull it. And so those insights are inaccurate. So it's very kind of dumbed down example, Brad or Robert. I don't know if you want to put a little bit more fancy spin on that, but just to bring it home for people to realize, like, it can be something that small where, a human might look at a list of files and be able to tell, okay, all right, that one was misspelled and this one isn't in the right structure, but I can tell by deductive reasoning that should go in this batch. And sure, you can program AI to look for those things, but would you rather spend your time having the AI be programmed to look for all those errors, or would you rather just fix that from the front end, and then automation is doing things, making sure that it's correct and accurate each time, and now AI is fully up to speed?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because project management's the perfect example. So again, like, you have a project management tool from like construction place like Procore, right? So all the construction guys and the engineers and the architects and the boots on the ground, they're using Procore every day. Then you have the ERP system, which the finance people are when they're tracking the finances for that project. They're in the ERP system. And then you have the CRM who's managing the customer relations aspect of it and delivering status reports and things like that. And it's pulling data from all these disparate systems. And if let's just say you have your project naming scheme is different in each one of those, and then how are you going to train AI and data to realize that it's just a little bit different? This one uses an underscore, this one uses a dash, this one uses a period between the naming standards. And so you come together as an organization, you get those stakeholders and say, how are you storing your data today? You're capturing everything in Procore, they're doing everything in the ERP. And then so you come together as a leadership team and as a center of excellence team and say, okay, we need to create a common schema that would be meshed for all of these. And that's where that ETL, or extract, transform, load process, or ELT, extract, load, transform. We won't get into all of that, but that's where that whole process is. You come up with a standard scheme. This is the company way of doing it. This is our way of doing it. This is how we name it. This is what it is. And we're just pulling data from all these other systems and we're merging it into our master data set.
Yeah, and I'll say, keep in mind, like, data to me drives any AI implementation. I mean, that's what we're talking about now. You want quick wins. Typically, if you're further down the journey, you can do these more long-term projects, like what Brad's kind of describing, where you're bringing in data from 3 massive systems, right? Like, definitely don't start there if you're thinking about it. I'm not going to assume anybody would, but let the data drive what you're going to do. So in some cases, if you know kind of how your data is today, that may be a step you want to take a look at a little bit earlier. But that's the thing I like to tell folks is, hey, let's take a step back. Like, what data do you have today? And honestly, most people, there's not one person in one company that can answer that question. You have to bring in multiple people, which brings in just all kinds of other, issues, right? With working with schedules and things like that. So let the data drive the discussion here on the AI side of it.
And not just that, but let the AI help you have these discussions. Again, whenever I have like discovery sessions with clients and customers, I ask for like, what's your schema on your SQL server? I upload that to our LLMs and I say, can you give me a summary of the schema? Do you see ways that this can improve? Again, you trust but verify, right, on all those sorts of things, but use these tools. Like, and you can tell it like, hey, we're using Salesforce for the CRM, we're using Procore, we want to merge the data and use that for an internal systems. How would we go about doing that? And use that kind of like this match that kind of like starts the fire. And then again, you come together and that brings us to step 4, select the appropriate tools aligned with organizational skills and infrastructure, right? If you're like a 300 person company and you have 2 IT folks and you don't have dedicated subject matter experts on site, then like choosing a tool like Procore is very difficult. Procore is an amazing tool, but it's massive. Like, it's this massive tool set that does everything. And so you probably need a subject matter expert or partner with someone who's a subject matter expert, and they bill you out tens of thousands of dollars a month to maintain that solution. If you're a startup, maybe don't overextend for that place. If you're a startup that uses Slack, Zoom, and then like Notion, then maybe like using like Microsoft Power Automate or Microsoft AI Studio probably doesn't make sense for you because you don't live in the Microsoft ecosystem. But if you live in the Microsoft ecosystem, then it would make sense for you to do that. And so just use the tools that you have. Again, we say that all the time, but death by 1,000 SaaS products, we're very much in favor of the catered solutions, but use the ones that make the most sense for you. And again, it's all about starting in an approachable way with the tools that make the most sense.
And if you're going to add tools, please, for heaven's sake, be mindful of what we were talking about earlier. Like, everybody and their mama is coming out with new SaaS products built on what, guys? LLMs, large LLMs, that they're going to put subject to all the problems that we talked about beforehand. So before you throw yet another tool into the tech stack, what's the new shiny thing, please do some diligence and understand what is powering that.
Yeah, as an example, so Gong is Gong.io. It's a great solution for CRM and like how to manage your marketing, how to manage your outreach. They're using off-the-shelf models. They have some secret sauce they do on the back end, but it's off-the-shelf models. Joyce.ai, they do RFPs. So like, their RFP bidding process, they're using, I think, Claude 3.7 or again, off-the-shelf APIs that they put some secret sauce on top of it. The reason I'm telling you that is because you could probably do that yourself without using these third-party tools, and you would probably get there faster because you're training it only on your data. You're training it only on what's important to you. They're not bringing in all this data, disparate data from all these other organizations to actually help train that bot. So a great point, Gary, is like, again, just know that these SaaS platforms, the overwhelming majority of the SaaS platforms, they're just wrappers for those off-the-shelf solutions. Robert, do you have anything for selecting appropriate tools?
I think we touch on this all the time. The reason why we like Copilot so much is lowest hanging fruit. It's right there. It's integrated in your systems. If you're a Google guy, use Gemini. Yeah, I mean, this is a huge thing that honestly sometimes gets overlooked because, hey, yeah, Copilot isn't the best, but it doesn't have to be the best. And that's when you need to make a strategic decision there to figure out, hey, does it make sense to try to integrate OpenAI with our SharePoint files? I can tell you right now that does not make sense because it's very, very difficult. And really the only tool that I've seen that's feasible is Copilot. And is it perfect? No, it's not perfect like any tool, right? But it gets you there.
No, that's a great point. So glad you brought that up. Again, make the one that makes the most sense. Again, if you're a G Suite customer and you use, Google as your email provider and use Google Meet, obviously Gemini is probably the world you need to live in from that LLM perspective.
Yeah, Google's making waves, man. I mean, Google's going to have a big impact, I think. So
their newest version of Gemini 2.5 is the best code developer right now, as an example. You're going to have to just kind of try them all. But for building these overall arching solutions, the open source models are really, really great. Mistrals, the llamas. And again, we're even thinking about all these frustrations we have with hallucinations. We're even thinking about internally building our own internal LLM, which we can do with Copilot Studio really easy on the Azure platform. But even then, it's still maybe not the autonomy that you want and the automation that we want. And so we're standing up these internal solutions ourselves to kind of dog food it and see if we can build solutions to share with others. There's not a turnkey solution out there right now. So that's the key point we're trying to make. But make the one that makes the most. Again, if you don't have subject matter experts on site, you just be doubly wary as you make that decision. Make that a crucial part of your scoring matrix for that decision. If you don't have a subject matter expert that can understand that tool set, like ProjectWise is one of the hardest platforms I've ever used in my life. It's like SAP for construction project. It's used for billion-dollar projects. And I spent 2.5 years doing a center of excellence for that at one of my previous companies. And it took tens of thousands of hours overall from all the team members involved to get that standard set. For a medium business, that doesn't make any sense. For a small enterprise, that does not make any sense. Unless you're living in a world where you have to live with that tool set, which does make that sense. Again, most small organizations, they're not going to want to do anything with Oracle, like NetSuite. It's just a massive tool that's probably more than you need to do. Most medium businesses can get by with QuickBooks or something along those same lines. You don't need NetSuite to manage everything. So just make that decision for AI, much like you would do for the technology decisions you've been trying to make as you grow your business.
And I'm sure there's at least a couple people listening who are thinking, I don't have time to play with these different models and vet these different models. And how am I gonna do that? Thankfully, now we live in a world where fractional services are available. And listen, whether it's you see it from finance to marketing to including technology, right? Don't be afraid to just leverage a few hours of expert advice to say, I know, you're playing with all these models. What's your take? Let me ask you some of these questions and kind of offboard a little bit of that. If you're a busy executive or leader and that doesn't have time to get in there and do that, that doesn't mean you just don't have a path forward. There's plenty of ways where you can leverage a few hours, or say, hey, you know what? I know I'm going to start unpacking some of these. Maybe you just want to get a retainer of 10 hours a month for someone that you trust as an advisor and have that the ability to have that augmented knowledge and brainstorming on the team without having to hire a whole, CTO yourself. So don't be afraid to look into that as well.
The thing that I've noticed is any AI SaaS product that is good at one thing is probably a decent product, right? Like Cursor and Windsurf, they're good at coding. They're not trying to do anything else other than that. And a lot of these other AI tools are trying to, hey, I want an RFP or a proposal builder tool, but they're doing it in every industry when every industry is completely different. Now, if there's an RFP tool where it's strictly, hey, we're hyper focused on this niche, those are the AI tools that I've seen actually work. And even then, like Brad said, though, a lot of these tools, and I would say most of them, are built on non-proprietary models that they really have no control over. They do have their own training data that they've inputted in. They're probably training, your data on their model. Even if they say they don't, I would always be worried as an IT manager of that. And so that's another thing to think about there.
Definitely a great point. Yeah, so select the appropriate tools aligned with the organizational skills and infrastructure. Carl Castro mentioned this whenever he was on. I think we've mentioned it several times. To get involved with your local community, right? We have the Houston AI Club here in Houston. There's also Houston AI, which is through the ION and Rice University and others. There's a lot. They're just going to the local meetup, meetup.com, and look for people who think like you, who are just trying to get out there. And that's how maybe, if you want to have a face-to-face conversation with someone, that's something you can certainly do. And you can get and surround yourself with people who don't know about this, who can give you that sort of guidance. Again, I think I would be wary of folks who aren't overly honest about the shortcomings of AI, especially the off-the-shelf SaaS solutions there are now. I'd be very wary of anybody just trying to force a SaaS solution down your throat. It's more about the people who understand the concepts and how important the data aspect is with it. But like Carrie's saying, there's the fractional aspect of it. That's a very successful part of our business. The people just, hey, we just have questions. We have no idea. We're a construction company with 15 people, and this isn't something we need to look at right now, but where do you see this in 18 months or 24 months for us? Like, we just give them that kind of roadmap for 10 hours, and make that happen. We're not the only company that does that. So just look out on LinkedIn and get those reviews and get that insights. It takes a village. Like, that's one reason we started this podcast, is we're hoping we're giving you a roadmap to be successful in this space and no cost, right? Because the more people that are educated, the more people are going to need our input eventually. So that's our overall goal. So step number 5 then of this process for implementing pragmatic or practical AI solutions and executions: implement pilot projects, and then gather feedback and iterate. That's the key point. Don't just implement the pilot project and be like, oh, we tried that out. The big thing is gather feedback, have those feedback loops, and constantly iterate. Right? I've talked about it many times, but we like being SpaceX, not Boeing. We may blow up a ship every now and then, but we're learning a lot from that. But we're just constant iteration and constant feedback loop, and capturing data and capturing metrics. And again, if you don't know how to do that within your organization, use these tools to say, hey, I'm rolling out this pilot project for this solution. What are some of the things I can do for the feedback loop? What are some questions I can ask? Constantly, do I need to what rhythm or tempo do I need to have that feedback loop? And how do we need to iterate? What's that process look like? And then, but the key thing is start with pilot projects, the low-hanging fruits, like we like to say, and then make sure you just get momentum.
Pilot projects are also great to start building, a quote unquote AI native culture. That's not going to happen overnight. And if you try to do that in one fell swoop, crash, bang, boom is an understatement, I'm sure. But the McKinsey, similar to the report that I mentioned earlier, and the link again will be in the show notes, but it notes that over 50% of executives are reskilling teams to spot use cases. So that in and of itself is an exercise and a skill worth undertaking with your workforce. That could be training step number 1. What is AI in general? And then how can you start to spot a use case, which we've talked ad nauseum about that today. And sorry for all my little interjections. I just want to make sure that it's really clear for everyone listening. So if 50% of executives are beginning to do this, I'm sure that by the time we revisit this in a few months, and especially by next year, that number is going to be drastically higher. But as an example, Lumen Technologies trains staff on Microsoft 365 Copilot. Would you go figure? I'm sure you've never heard us say that before. But what was the outcome? It boosted productivity, and it's supporting this workforce transformation, which is what is happening here, right? This is absolutely a categorical shift, the same as when the Industrial Revolution happened, right? So just start down the path, one foot in front of the other, and that's the types of insights that we're trying to provide and make it really actionable.
Yeah, I think this is where step 1 and 2 come in heavily with the KPIs, making sure whatever you're doing, whatever's been built, whatever you're presenting and getting feedback on is solving whatever that problem is, the KPI, increasing that or decreasing that, whatever it is. Because I think everybody can kind of get in the trap of, well, hey, this is important for me, this part of this automation or AI implementation, but from a global company perspective, that's very, very important not to lose sight of that. So I think I've seen that happen at least a few times in my experience.
Yeah, the key is to have structured pilots with clear ownership. Like, who owns this? Who's at the top of this? Who owns this? And then The big thing also is cross-functional involvement. So again, you're getting teams involved from across the organization. Our Copilot rollout we've done for one of our customers is basically we had a lunch and learn session with 20 people from all across the organization. It wasn't just from one group and another group. And so we could understand that we cross-pollinate, and they're like, oh, you're doing that, I'm doing this. Like, again, most of these organizations, everybody's too busy to have these cross-functional conversations. So use this as a like checkpoint of like, hey, what are you guys working on? I'm not even really sure. We haven't touched base in a quarter, and then use these tools to help you communicate. And so have that cross-functional involvement. And again, the most important aspect, clear communication, clear and frequent communication. You don't need to over communicate, but you need to like, hey, this pilot project, we have a weekly update on it. Maybe have it with the leadership call, but maybe you post that to a Microsoft team for everybody to see. You define those clear goals as part of that communication, and you just let people know where you are on that process. That's the best thing you can do, but someone needs to take ownership. And I know, especially in larger organizations, people taking ownership is really hard because if this fails, am I going to look bad? But you have to create a culture. We talked about culture creation last week. You have to create a culture where failure is okay as long as you're learning. The whole point of rolling out a structured pilot is you're trying to figure out whether that works or not. If every structured pilot you roll out, you accept, then your decision criteria is probably not where it needs to be. You shouldn't be accepting every pilot you do. The whole point is you're trying it out. We've all been to Baskin Robbins, right? And they give you a taste of every flavor you want. You're not going to tell me you like all 32 flavors. If you do, you're a madman. Maybe you do. You just go suicide it all the way down. But you should be looking at technology in the same way. Like you're sampling it. It's like, does this make sense for me? We all know chocolate peanut butter is the best anyways. So, all right. I think with the link to this, we have a couple more topics to take, but I think we can probably get down to our hot takes. And so, Carrie, do you want to jump in with yours?
Yeah, just strategy starts with clarity, right? You can't measure, or you can't manage what you can't measure, and you can't communicate if you don't know what you're even supposed to be reporting on, or if you don't have benchmarks that you're referencing against.
Robert?
Yeah, I mean, start small, scale smart. The big takeaway for me is you don't always have to go 100 miles an hour. And I mean, at least I fall in this trap of like, I want to do this. And this is my primary focus for this week. Don't rush it. Build it for you. Build something for you. Present it to maybe a larger group of people and expand from there. And then that's where you go back to what we were saying before with these 5 steps. You're maybe sitting here saying, hey, I'm too low down the food chain. I can't do any of this. I can't get anybody in a room. That's how I would tackle that problem, because I know I've been in those shoes myself. And then scale it smart. And I think that's where the 5 steps come in.
And my hot take is basically an AI roadmap isn't set in stone. If you're setting anything in AI in stone, you're doing it wrong, because as we know from our news segments every week, what we talk about this week is going to be out of date next week. That's just the way it is. And flexibility and responsiveness to the change in the AI strategies is what's going to separate the wheat from the chaff, like the good from the bad. I think you have to have faith in your ability to figure things out. I think going forward, again, I was at an event with the University of St. Thomas last week, and we were talking about like kids don't know how to read analog clocks anymore, right? Kids don't know how to write cursive. They're just things where we're going to lose knowledge, right? Just because we don't need it, because we have every answer we could ever want in this book. And so like those soft skills, like problem solving skills, those are what we're going to have to teach people going forward. And like the reading, writing, and arithmetic days of like how we've taught kids in school since like the 1850s, that probably needs to change too. That's another conversation for another day. But like, just know that you have to have faith in your ability to figure things out. And you have more tools now than ever in human history to help you figure things out. Just imagine the coders who had to think out, how are we going to land on the moon in the 1960s? And they were using pencil and paper. And like now you can literally ask ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude or anything with a voice on here and say, hey, can you tell me how they landed on the moon, technically speaking, in the 1960s? And it'll just dump it out to you. Like all the most complex problems in the world that have ever been solved are at your fingertips. And so just know that your business problems, while they may be difficult, they've probably been solved before and or been closely solved before in the same sort of manner. And so just know that, have faith in your ability to figure things out, and your team to communicate enough to know whenever you need to pivot. I like to say, like I was talking to a group of students last week, that you need to learn to pivot more than Dr. J. For people who don't know who Dr. J is, he was a great basketball player from many years ago, but you have to, he's like the creator of the pivot. You just have to be the ability to pivot. And like whenever you're building solutions, you're constantly doing. How I started this company is completely different than what we're doing now. It's just, you have to, and I think you just attack every problem in your business that same way, including AI. So I think for now, we'll probably start to wrap things up. And so again, we'll provide all of this in our show notes, the 5 steps. We have a visualization of that. But basically, it's define clear, measurable business objectives for AI, identify key use cases through stakeholder input and workflow analysis, conduct a thorough assessment of data readiness and quality, select appropriate tools aligned with organizational skills and infrastructure, and finally, implement pilot projects, gather feedback, and iterate. And much like this podcast itself, we're constantly gathering feedback and iterating. So, Carrie, do you want to take us to the call to action for us?
Yeah, we're streaming on all major platforms. We have a master link that will bring you to whichever is your favorite. Also, highly suggest checking out our LinkedIn newsletter. It's just a kind of Cliff Notes version of the key topics and takeaways. Also, all those wonderful links. And if you've got a question or idea or a win to share, we would love to hear that. Feel free to drop us a comment on whatever platform or reach out to us at contact@digitalmeld.io. We'd love to, tailor future episodes based on real challenges and insights and conversations from you all. So love to hear whatever you have to share with us, and always looking to feature bold thinkers and builders. So if you or someone would be a great guest, we'd love to hear that too.
Robert, do you have anything you want to add before we wrap it up?
I'll add that I know a lot of people may disagree with us. We want to hear from you too.
Yeah, we definitely do.
I think that's very important in this, and that's why I think these discussions need to be had, because again, I'll speak for myself. Very biased on the technology side. That's why we love having Carrie, because she keeps us honest.
I try. Sorry for my little interjections. Hopefully they're useful. And listen, hey, if y'all want to hear me less doing that less, tell me that too. That's fine.
No, they're gonna say no. Just kick Robert and Brad out. We want to hear Carrie more. She's speaking stuff that's actually realistic.
Yeah. No, this is a great topic. Again, I think hopefully by the end of this goal, yes, AI is coming. Yes, people are scared that it's going to affect our lives and affect jobs and affect careers. Just be a lifelong learner. That's the thing going forward. Be a lifelong learner, and the beauty is you have the tools to make it where you can learn really, really easily. I went down a couple of nights ago down the theories of relativity and quantum physics with just talking to ChatGPT. And I was just, because I wanted to compare ChatGPT and Gemini and Meta's new AI, all the voice assistants. So I just what are the responses they're going to do? And it's this is insanity. I used to have to know what a Dewey Decimal System was and go to look up microfiche and something you don't even know what I'm talking about. And that's just how rapid the changes come. But just know that the beauty is it's easier than ever. You can take Harvard classes in your underwear for free. That's a wild world to live in.
The only thing you need to worry about, and a lot like I think Carrie mentioned before, is I don't have time to do this. I don't have time to do that. That's going to change as these things iterate, and you're going to start having more time, and you're going to start being, time's going to get freed up, because some things that you're doing today, you're probably not going to do tomorrow. Be thinking about that too.
Yeah, those easy tasks are going away, and the hard tasks are becoming easy, and the impossible tasks are becoming hard. That's just the way we're just ramping it up. And I think we'll leave her from there. Next week, we're having another talk, artificial intelligence snake oil, what it can and can't do and how to spot the difference. I think that's really important. We talk about this all the time, but there is a lot of snake oil out there. I've actually used that term before. There's a great speech. So we'll probably have some clips next week, and we're going to try that with some clips and stuff and do everything from, again, people much smarter than myself talking about that. But just snake oil, how you can spot that difference. But again, if you have any questions about how to approach your roadmap, we're happy to have a conversation with you. Reach out to us. Linktree.com/digitalmeld has all the links to the show and Digital Meld itself and all of our LinkedIn pages and all that good stuff. So again, no excuses other than time, but then use these tools to help free up your time so you do have some time. With that said, thank you again for joining us. We look forward to talking to you next week. Bye.
See ya.
Thanks.
We want to hear about your AI and automation journey, and we'd love for you to get involved with Start Small, Think Big. If you'd like to participate or offer feedback, please reach out to us anytime via email at contact@digitalmeld.io or use the contact form on our website, digitalmeld.io/contact. Also, please help spread the word by liking, subscribing, and sharing our podcasts on your podcast platform of choice. Thanks.